just to begin with, to ground us in the moment that we're in, the VDEM Institute, which is institute in Sweden that is a democracy watchdog organization, issues annual democracy reports, and in their latest, the picture of democracy globally doesn't look good, right? So there's a global democratic decline underway. 71% of the global population now lives under autocratic regimes, and that's compared to 48% a decade ago. And year over year, there seem to be gains on the part of authoritarians. There's a general trend toward autocracy. It is affecting about 35% of the world's population, including major democracies like India and countries like in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, where they're among the most affected. The progress of democracy is not good. There's some standouts, like Brazil made some significant gains, but generally speaking, on the whole, we're going in the wrong direction. And particularly on key components of democracy: freedom of expression, clean elections, and civil society and freedom of association. All of those things are declining. Like I said, the news in general is not good. But I share it with you because I think it's really important for us to have our eyes on the world, because the movement that we're being faced with here in the United States, this white Christian nationalist movement, is not just here at home, but also learning from other authoritarians and autocrats abroad within networks that they share, and developing their strategies and tactics in that context. So we should be looking to the countries of the world that are being affected by autocracy now to try to learn from them and start to develop our toolkits and our knowledge about the issues, because there's much to learn from places abroad, including Brazil, El Salvador, India, Thailand, the Philippines, Myanmar, many places where pro-democracy activists may be under siege, but are actually making some progress. So with that, though, the story of the rise of authoritarianism, as has been repeated over and over again recently, decades old, right? It goes all the way back to the middle of the 20th century, and is basically rooted in racist and misogynistic populism on the right, deployed in particular by one of our two major parties, you know which one, in order to break with a long tradition of domination on the part of the other party, especially at the national level and national policymaking. Because that agenda on the right was not a popular one, it's quite an elite agenda, they exploited cultural fault lines around race and gender in order to build a reactionary base they could mobilize in defense of what they called traditional family values. The real agenda for most elites on the right was not social but economic, and specifically neoliberal. Right. So by building a reactionary base of politics and doing it in a way that divided their opposition, their reactionary plurality that they built with this traditional family values agenda was able to exercise majoritarian power and put the opposition party to their left on its heels, forcing it to adapt to neoliberalism, which then alienated the traditional base of that party, which are workers like us, right? While adopting a popular front strategy of what I sometimes call identity populism. These moves in the right and left neglected the issues that most of us share and have driven polarization from above. But, when it comes down to it, we still share most issues in common, right? We're not as polarized as people think we are. Instead, what's happening is that political parties have driven polarization, and they've also limited our choices in elections in ways that reflect their agendas. But the voters assume that those who are elected reflect the values of the entire base of each of those parties. And especially those who are the most politically engaged on the right and the left, who are paying attention to politics and so know what the agendas of the autocrats are. They understand what the policy agendas of those who oppose them are, and interpret that as something that's understood broadly in the whole base, right? And this has ignited a kind of conflict between left and right that is actually starting to drive centrist voters toward authoritarian solutions. So it's a problem that we need to address. And we need to address it in part because this extreme polarization has basically undermined the possibility of multiracial democracy in the United States. There is not sufficient trust in our institutions. Civil society is far too divided for us to be able to be secure in advancing, continuing to advance social inclusion and expand upon our democratic freedoms. And so this is really important thing to know. So I draw some of this information from Rachel Kleinfeld at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I recommend you go and read her because she's online and you can find all of her stuff. But you know, basically the way that this has affected us is that you know, we are in a situation now where, because of the interpretation of that kind of extreme polarization driven from the top down by the most politically active on the left and the right, that then interpretation and the way we've reacted to it is driving something else called affective polarization, which is emotional polarization, the kind of polarization that drives political violence. And so that's the situation we're in. And I named this specifically among many things we could be talking about, because this kind of extreme polarization is something we can actually do something about. So, you know, one of the things that will be really critically important to us in this time is to recognize that those of us who identify with the left, as I do, have a lot more power than we might imagine ourselves being if we could reframe some of the key issues in ways that actually deflect some of that polarization as one thing, right? And then start building trust in local institutions through actually holding them accountable. You know, a lot of what's happening out there is people talk about trust in institutions and they basically talk about it, right? They try to convince us that we must trust our institutions in order to save our democracy. But the reality is that in places around the world where people are doing that work, they're doing it through working on local issues, winning representation within those institutions, including very small institutions like, you know, the water board or, you know, the, you know, like a, what do you call it? Basically the equivalent of like dog catcher type of offices. And then demanding more transparency, more accountability, and driving good governance. So for example, in Thailand, one of the you know, great successes of the Future Forward and the Move Forward parties, which has been making great advances for democracy there, has been around potable water. So because potable water is a real issue for most people in Thailand, they can't afford to buy clean water. It's something that most people hold in common, that they want drinkable water. And so what they're doing is basically targeting the institutions that are responsible for water quality and winning spots in those institutions for people who are from communities that are the most affected by those issues, and then demanding transparency in the process in order to engage people in what amounts to truth, reconciliation, and repair around the issue of water. So there are lots of things like that that we can do, and I think that is in the staple kind of issue agenda of the Kairos Center. So good for you on that, right? You're a great teacher on those issues for all of us. But you know, it's from those kinds of small local acts up to much bigger things, things that we can do around reframing the way we're approaching these issues. And one of the things that the Thai informant I spoke to told me that I thought was particularly helpful was she said that they focus in their work on opportunity and not on restrictions. So rather than talking about how many restrictions are on you, which is basically narrating the power of authoritarians in your life and perhaps driving more fear, chilling the possibility of broad-based organizing, what they do instead is they talk about opportunity, and they don't just talk about it, they also illustrate it. And so, you know, I've seen some political ads that they produce, and, you know, they're not the kinds of political ads we produce in the United States where somebody's screaming about the opposition party. There are ads in which people of all different ethnicities in colorful clothing are dancing and singing together and basically acting out freedom of expression, acting out the right to protest, acting out all of the different things that have been limited or robbed from them there as a way of inspiring in people a sense of hope and possibility that if I join the party and I take part, I can be part of the change that I want to see in the world. And, you know, it taps into a deep longing that people have that I think is also evident here in the United States. We saw this when, you know, one of our two candidates dropped out and someone replaced him that lifted people's spirits, and the amount of outpouring of joy that we saw in that moment really speaks to just how much people want to see something positive and to be able to work toward that end. So just to keep it in mind, there's in the 40 or so years that I've been doing this particular kind of work on the right, I started out being in what people now refer to as fight the right mode, right? We exposed them, we, disparaged them, we attacked them, we did all these kinds of things, which are totally legitimate tactics still. But it was always right versus left, right? What we didn't do was actually speak to the broad public in the middle. And so, over the years, I've learned the necessity of making that pivot. Always remembering, of course, that the constituency for tough on crime, for mass incarceration, for more repressive policy is almost always those in the middle who respond to political instability and danger by wanting strong man leaders and more repressive government.